didn't complain too much last week because he asked me to preach again this week. So, amen. But you can go ahead and turn in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 32. I cannot wait to see what God has left in store for us today. After the way this service has begun, I can't wait to see. I believe we've only scratched the surface of what he's going to do in this place. And listen, I'd encourage you today to be a participator, to invest in this moment, to be somebody who engages yourself in this moment to hear what God has to say. How many know that two people can come in with two totally different problems, hear the same message preached, and God will speak directly to each situation exactly what they need to hear? But the difference is that you invest yourself, that you engage and hear from him. But while you're finding Genesis 32, I just wanted to kind of set it up in case you haven't been to church recently, maybe don't attend church or just don't know this story. Jacob was a guy who was a deceiver. Jacob lived the whole first part of his life deceiving everybody that he came in contact with. He deceived his brother Esau into giving him the birthright. He deceived his father into giving him the blessing. And then he got tricked. And his uncle Lot deceived him and made him marry both of his cousins. Yes, I said cousins. Instead of just one of them. He wanted to marry one of his cousins. Why? I don't know, but he did. And he ended up having to marry both. But after he got tricked by Lot, he came back and tricked Lot again. And so Jacob was always on the run. He was always running from people that he had tricked. But by this point, when we find him in chapter 32, he's decided kind of to get it right. Anybody ever gone through life one way and kind of woke up one day and realized, hey, I need to correct some things that maybe I've done wrong? And so he's headed back to see his brother Esau. And for all he knows, when he sees Esau, Esau's going to kill him. But he's trying to make things right, so he's headed to see Esau. And he has this moment in Genesis chapter 32 and verse 22. It says, that night, Jacob got up and took his two wives, which during this time period was acceptable to have two wives. How many men want to go back to this? I'm just kidding. Don't raise your hand. Don't raise your hand. I wish you could have seen some of the looks I got. Like, the women are staring me down. The men are like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do right now. No, I'm just kidding. But he had two wives, which I don't know why he would have wanted two in the first place. I feel like one is plenty. And so he says, that night Jacob got up, took his two wives and his two female servants and his 11 sons and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. And after he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all of his possessions. So since Jacob was left alone, a man wrestled with him till daybreak. And when the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that it was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. It was wrenched as he wrestled. It was wounded while he was still wrestling with the man. And then the man said, let me go, for it is daybreak. But Jacob replied, I will not let you go unless you bless me. See, Jacob said, I'm not going through this for nothing. I'm not experiencing this pain for no reason. I'm not enduring this problem without having something to show for it. I'll let you go, but first, you're going to bless me. And then the man asked him, what is your name? Jacob, he answered, and the man said, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. Tell somebody next to you, I'm an overcomer. And Jacob said, please tell me your name. But he replied, why do you ask my name? And then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, it is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. And the sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. See, here we see Jacob engage in this fight. He engages in this struggle, and he suffers an injury to his hip. And what's so interesting is that it would be with him for the rest of his life. And it was not an injury or a wound that he would be able to cover up. It says in verse 31, he was limping. You ever seen somebody limp? You've seen them walk around or you ever hurt your foot yourself and you don't have full mobility. He was limping. It was obvious. For the rest of his life, everywhere Jacob went, he is reminded of this moment. Every day that he gets up, every time he walks, every time he does anything, he's reminded of this struggle. He's reminded of this pain. He carries this wound around for the rest of his life. And it's not just a reminder for Jacob, it's a reminder for everybody he comes in contact with. This is not a wound that Jacob was able to cover up. This is not something that Jacob was able to act like it never happened. And so his wounded hip was with him for the rest of his life. And what's amazing to me about Jacob, though, is that after he was wounded, he decided that he wasn't going to quit fighting. After he was wounded, he continued persevering. He said, I'm not wounded for no reason. I'm not hurting for no reason. I'm not in pain for no reason. I'm taking something with me. I'm getting something out of this wounded situation. So for this 4th week of Best Year Yet, I want to subtitle the message, Life Won't Wait for the Wounded. Life won't wait for the wounded. Tell the person sitting next to you that has the best breath that life won't wait when you're wounded. Go ahead and tell the other person next to you so they're not offended. Life won't wait when you're wounded. Let's pray. God, I thank you for your presence. I thank you that you are here in the midst of us even this morning. And I pray that you would help us not to take this moment lightly. Pray that you would help us to have ears to hear. Pray that you would take away all preconceived ideas and help us to be open to hear and receive from you. I pray that you would put me on like a coat and wear me and help them not to see and to hear from me, but to see and to hear from you. And I thank you for it in Jesus' name. And everybody said, Amen. Now, how many of you have ever ridden in a 12 or 15 or 17 passenger van? Ever ridden in one of those? How many of you have ever driven one? How many of you have driven one full of teenagers? Okay, so I have a couple people that have been through the tribulation with me. See, back on December 31st of last year, we decided to take some of the students from our youth ministry on a conference trip to the Winter Ramp Conference in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. Represent. And so there were about 10 of us. And so we thought with 10 people and all the luggage, it may be a good idea to rent a 17-passenger van. I regretted that idea as soon as I pulled up on the parking lot and saw how big this van was. Because something you need to know about me, I'm a good driver in my mind, but if you rode with me, you would not think I was a good driver. Because I drive a little Nissan Altima Coupe. I've always driven small vehicles. I don't like big vehicles. I had a truck for 9 months, and I turned it back in and took all the penalties because I couldn't do it anymore. I can't drive. I wait till the last minute to turn because that way I save on gas. Because if you're still going a little fast, then you don't have to push the gas that much. Y'all laugh at me, but I'm saving more money than you at the time. Of course, we're all saving money right now. But I wait till the last minute to turn. And then I always wait until the last minute to brake. Because I'm in a little car, it's less car to stop. You know, some of us, we know if you're running down the street, if you're running somewhere, it takes you a little longer to stop than others maybe. And that's how my car is. Since it's so small, it's easy to stop. So I always wait till the last minute. So I pull up and I see this van and I knew I had a problem. Because it took like a lift to even get me into the van. And then once I got in it, I felt as if I were in a cockpit or like driving a tank or a semi-truck. And so I drove over to the church, and I got in the parking lot, and everybody gets in. And they're all laughing, cutting up, and I am a nervous wreck. Okay, like my palms are sweaty. I have them on the steering wheel. I never took them off, like the 10 and the 2. I'm driving like grandma drives, you know. I'm sitting upright. I'm looking straight ahead. And I told Chemo's one of our student leaders, and he was sitting in the passenger seat. When you go through life, be careful who you choose to ride shotgun with you. Because Chemo, that was a life lesson, by the way, in case you missed it. But Chemo, he's riding shotgun. And I said, Chemo, I'm putting you in charge of navigation. Chemo's like, okay. And I said, but here's the thing. I need you to tell me at least a mile in advance before I need to turn. He's like, okay. I said, Chemo, do you understand what I'm saying? I need a mile because it's going to take that long to slow this thing down and turn it. And Chemo says, I got you, man. I got you. Now, I didn't know what I got you means. I now know that it means I don't understand what you're asking me to do. Because we took the highway for a reason, to avoid all the curves and the turns. But when you get into Tennessee, there is no avoiding the curves and the turns. And so we've been riding straight for like 3.5 hours. And I said, Chemo, Mr. Navigation, are there any turns coming up? He said, no, you're good. It's like, okay, cool. 5 minutes later, Chemo, any turns I need to know about? No, you're good. Matter of fact, he got smart with me. He said, I told you I would tell you if there were some turns. All right? So fine, I'll let you do your job then, okay? And I'll do mine, and I'm driving. So I'm driving, and I'm just, by this point, I'm feeling a little cocky, okay? I feel like I am one with the road. I am one with this van. I'm waving at people out the window. You know, I'm smiling. I'm cutting up. I'm driving. And all of a sudden, Chemo goes, this is your turn. And I'm like, naturally, I'm thinking that I have a mile left to make this turn, right? Because this is the instruction I gave him. And he said, I got you. So I'm thinking I have a mile. So I nonchalantly turn my blinker on and start to get ready to turn in a mile. And probably 5 seconds later, Chemo goes, Dustin, this is your turn. And so I slam on the brakes. He may tell this story a little differently, but I'm up here telling it, so this is how I'm going to tell it. So I slam on the brakes, and I start to turn. Now, the thing I didn't realize was, you know how most roads that I drive on, they have grass on both sides of the street. So if you take the turn a little too wide, it's okay, the grass kind of saves you, or too short. Well, I look over, and there is nothing. I'm talking nothing. I see nothing out my window, and I'm stopped. And I'm trying to figure out what to do. I can't back up because there's cars coming for days. I'm trying to stay calm and figure this situation out. I'm praying, God, can you please lengthen the road? And all is well because nobody in the back knows what's going on. They're all like cutting up and sleeping and listening to music. And all of a sudden from the back I hear, yo, yo, yo. And I was like, what? And so everybody wakes up and they start screaming for no reason because all they can see out the window is nothing. Now, the important thing is we made it. I believe in miracles. God extended the road, something happened, because I'm telling you, in the natural, it should not have happened. We should be at the bottom of the mountain in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. But we made it. But for the rest of the trip, all I heard about, Dustin, do you remember that time you almost killed us? Dustin, do you remember that time you almost drove Elevate Youth off a cliff? Dustin, do you think maybe you could take this turn a little more slowly than the other turns you take for the rest of the trip? But I didn't make the same mistake again. And for the rest of the trip, I never ran into a problem for one reason. I took control of the navigation. And I put the navigation on my phone. And Chemo no longer told me when to turn because how many knows that my navigation gives me many miles in advance? See, I wasn't going to go through that experience and not learn from it. Now, that was a driving experience that went wrong. Now I want to talk about our life experiences that go wrong. Real battles with real wounds. Things in our lives that are sometimes so deep, the wound is so deep that we feel as if we'll never be able to get rid of the mark that it left on our lives. There are people here today who are walking around with a limp from things that happened 5, 10, 15 years ago, maybe even just last year, and you're limping and you're barely able to move because of the wound that it left on your life. And the frustrating thing about these wounded moments is that life does not pause when you're in pain. Like, have you ever wanted to just call time out on life? You know, just like, time out. You know, can I have a month? Can I have a month where I don't have to worry about people? I don't have to worry about finances. I don't have to worry about problems. I don't have to worry about family, relation. I don't have to worry about anything. I can just have time to heal. I can just have time for my wound to get better. Anybody ever been there? You wanted a break from life. But the thing is, life does not wait for the wounded. And I know that sounds harsh, and I know that sounds insensitive, but I'm just being honest because the sooner that we realize life does not pause whenever we're in pain, then the sooner that we can begin to move forward, realizing that no matter how dark it is, there is always light at the end. And God is always working something for us because our life will go on. And the question is not, will life go on? The question is, will you? Will you? Because we all experience pain. And so in this story that we read, Jacob is going through this difficult situation. He was wounded. He was hurting in his hip. But he did not allow his wounded experience to stop him from moving forward. As a matter of fact, it was after he was wounded that he got his blessing. It was after he experienced the pain that he continued to push forward into the thing that God had for him. Because it says in verse 25, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. And then the man said, let me go, for it is daybreak. But Jacob replied, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Jacob said, I'm not wasting this moment. I'm not going through this for nothing. See, being wounded is not the problem. A lot of times we get wounded and we think there's something wrong with us. We get wounded and we get mad at the other people. Being wounded is not the problem. The problem is when you're wounded for no reason. When you go through something difficult and you don't learn from it. And then you end up repeating the cycle again. And the first point on your notes this morning is your past can make you better or bitter. It can make you better or bitter. Everything that you go through can make you better or bitter, but it cannot do both. And so many of us are going through life and we're wounded because everyone gets wounded, but not everyone allows their wounded experience to be a teaching moment. Not everyone allows what they go through to be something that they learn from. And it all has to do with your perspective, how you see what you're going through. Because every experience in your life, good, bad, indifferent, no matter what you go through, is a teaching moment. There are lessons to be learned from everything that we encounter in life. But so often we miss out on the lesson because we're so focused on the pain. We miss out on what God's trying to teach us and prepare us for because we're so focused on the person that hurt us. And we're bitter and we're upset and it's all we can think about and it consumes our mind. And the greatest tragedy in life is not experiencing a difficult season. The greatest tragedy in life is not even going through a wound that sticks with you for the rest of your life. The greatest tragedy is getting so focused on the pain of what you went through that you miss out on where God is taking you. And if we're going to have the best year yet, which I firmly 100% believe we are, that not just for the church, but for you individually, this will be your best year yet. I don't know what last year was like. I don't know what the year before, but this will be your best year yet. Does anybody believe that in this place? That 2015 will be the best year that you've ever experienced. But if it's going to be our best year yet, then it is going to require us to get to a place where we're not so focused on the pain of what we went through. And we don't allow our bitterness to hold us back. But instead we take what we went through and what we learned from it and use that to move us forward into the things that God has for our lives. See, some of us, this is what we do. We just try to remove it from our memory altogether. As if it never happened. As if we never experienced a problem. As if we were never wounded. You know what phrase is very popular in church culture that I really don't like? Don't think about it, because the past is the past. Now, here's why I don't like that statement. And I understand it. I get where it comes from. But here's why I don't like it. Because if you go through life acting like you never went through anything, instead of learning from what you went through, then you're going to repeat the same thing all over again. I'm not saying to dwell on the past. I'm not saying to be bitter towards people in the past. I'm just saying don't forget the lesson that you should have learned in the past. You go forward in what you're doing, but you remember what you went through. You remember the lesson that it taught you in your life. Let me say it to you like this. A wound that is neglected gets infected. On your body, if you have an open wound and you cover it up so that nobody sees it and you don't have to adhere to it, then eventually it may be okay for a day or two, and you may be able to fool people, but eventually that thing's going to get infected, and it's going to become even worse than it ever would have been if you would have addressed the issue and fixed the problem. You got to learn from what you went through. I love my dog to life. I don't say to death because Mom kind of trained me that way. I love my dog to life. She is the bomb. She's a boxer, and she's friendly, and if you come and visit, she'll pee all over you because of how excited she gets to see people. But sometimes she's not the brightest, because every time, without fail, that she goes outside and eats grass, she will come back in and throw up 3 times. Every time. If I see her outside eating grass, I go ahead and get the paper towels ready. If she comes in licking her chops, I get the paper towels ready because I know what's about to happen. And every time without fail, she'll go out and eat grass, come back in, and throw up 3 times. Why? Because she's not learning from the repercussions of what she's going through. She's going through the same thing every time because you're going to go through the same thing every time until you realize, hey, maybe I need to learn something from what I went through. Maybe instead of just trying to hide it, maybe instead of just trying to act like it never happened, I need to realize that this is a teaching moment. This is a learning moment. This is a time for me to learn something for my future, because you're going to go through the same thing. You're going to go through the same thing because we're so naive that we like to act as if we never had a wounded moment, as if we never had a difficult time. And for whatever reason, we try to act as if we've never had any problems. We'll try to just cover up the wound. We'll try because we think our wounds make us weak. We think our wounds make us appear less than. We think our wounds make us appear broken. We think our wounds make us appear like something's wrong with us. But your wounds are meant to show not how weak you are, but how strong you actually are. That you went through some things, and it hurt, and it was painful, and it wounded you. But guess what? You made it through. It may have been difficult. It may have been hard. It may not have been easy, but you made it through. And the fact that you made it through is proof that God is not done with you. If you will learn from what you went through, then you can get prepared for where God is taking you. Our wounds are lessons in life. Our wounds are meant to show us and proof that we made it through. All great champions have wounds. All great champions have scars. And so many of us, the tragedy is we walk around and we carry our wounds with shame. We're shameful for what we went through. And so we're trying to cover it up and act like it never happened because we're so ashamed of all the things that we've experienced. But you should carry your wounds with pride, because your wound is a lesson. Every wound that you have is a lesson learned. Every wound that you have is a step closer to the thing that God is wanting to do in your life. Next thing on your notes is, just because you're wounded, it doesn't mean that you're broken. Just because you're wounded doesn't mean you're broken. Every wound is a lesson to get you closer to where God's trying to take you and where He's purposed for you. That's what I love about Jesus, is that He understands our wounds. He understands what we've gone through. He doesn't just know it on an intellectual level, but He knows our wounds. Because Jesus Himself was beaten physically. Jesus Himself was crucified. Jesus Himself was rejected by almost everyone He came to save. He had His own heart broken. He was betrayed by one of those who was closest to Him, His disciple Judas. He's experienced the pain. But every pain, every disappointment, every struggle for Jesus was moving Him that much closer to the purpose that He had on this earth of fulfilling our salvation on the cross. And the Bible says that He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities, but they could not break His purpose. Come on, somebody. Just because you're wounded, it doesn't mean that you're broken. Just because you're hurting, it doesn't mean your purpose is over. Everything you go through is a lesson to get you prepared for where God's trying to take you. But so often we try to just act like it never happened, or we just try to cover up the wound. Back a couple weeks ago, I went to get a haircut. And I was like, okay, I want to keep the sides short, but I want to grow the top out long because I'm trying as much as possible to grow hair as long as I can. Because this receding hairline has me praying some prayers 24/7, y'all. And so I'm like, I want to let the top grow, right? And the first thing she did right after I said that is cut the top of my hair. And I said, what are you doing? I don't want, and she said, I know you want the top of your hair to grow, but it's dead. And if I don't cut it back a little bit, then it's not going to grow. But if you let me cut it a little bit, it'll grow back stronger and it'll grow back faster. See, sometimes you get cut. Sometimes you get wounded. Sometimes you go through some things that you don't understand and you don't know why you had to go through it. But if you'll continue to move forward, you'll see that God just had to let it happen to cut you back a little bit so you could come back that much stronger. And you had to go through this a little bit so you could come up that much faster. We get wounded, but it's preparing us. It's making us stronger. It's teaching us things that we never could have learned otherwise in our lives. Look back at verse 28 real quick. I'm almost done. It says, then the man said, your name will no longer be Jacob but Israel, because you struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. And what's so amazing about this is that it came after Jacob was wounded. He was wounded and he continued to push through what he was going through so that he could experience what God had for his life. And I feel like God wanted me to tell somebody today that's wounded, somebody who's been struggling, somebody who's been wondering, is it worth it? Somebody who's been feeling as if there's no end in sight, as if it will never get better, as if you'll never be able to experience life again. I feel like God wanted me to tell somebody today that sometimes you have to play hurt. Sometimes you have to play hurt. And the frustrating thing about playing hurt is that it will make things that used to be easy hard. Anybody who ever played a sport growing up, if you got an injury, you know how that injury could stop you from being able to do what you used to be able to do easily. Or maybe you just got a little older, and so when you go out to play a sport, you realize everything doesn't function as well as it used to function, and you feel at a disadvantage, and it's a little more difficult. See, whenever you're wounded, whenever you're hurt, it'll make things that used to be easy hard. Somebody in here used to love so easily. You used to show the love of Jesus everywhere you went. You were such an outgoing person. You were a loving person. You were kind. You were just giving to everybody, but you got hurt. And so now you're cold and you're bitter and you don't know how to love people anymore. And what used to be easy is now hard. Somebody used to trust very easily, but now you can't even trust those closest to you because you got hurt. And what used to be easy is now hard. Some of you used to love going to church. Some of you couldn't wait to wake up on Sunday morning and be in God's presence. Every time the doors were open, you were there, but you got hurt. And so now it's a battle every time you wake up on Sunday of whether or not you want to get out of bed and go to church, because what used to be easy is hard. When you're wounded and you're hurting, it makes what used to be easy hard. And for Jacob, I would imagine that it was very difficult for him to wrestle with a hurt hip. I don't know a whole lot about wrestling, okay? I didn't do it when I was growing up because I was too small, even though I probably could have won my weight class. But the reason I never wrestled is because it was never appealing to me or tempting to want to put on an oversized pair of Spanx and go out and grab and try to throw other guys onto the ground and like jump on top of them and all kinds of things. It was just never my thing. But I've seen them wrestle. And when they wrestle, they're moving around, right? And they're using their legs and they have mobility and they're using their arms to wrestle. See, Jacob lost the mobility in his hip, but he kept doing the same thing. He got what he needed because he kept doing the same thing even when it was hard, even when it hurt, even when he didn't know if he could do it anymore. He kept doing the same thing. See, so often we think that our wounds are what's holding us back. But the truth is, it's our belief that our wounds are holding us back. It's not what you went through that's holding you back and stopping you from being able to move forward into what God has. It's the belief in your mind that what you went through disqualified you from being able to do what God is wanting you to do. Just because you're wounded, it doesn't mean that you're dead. You can still do what God is wanting you to do in your life. It may be painful, and the wound may be deep, and some days you may feel like you'll never laugh again, like you'll never smile again, like it will never get easier again. And some days you may just feel like giving up, but having been there, I can promise you that it's not the end. It's not over. But this is the key. You have to prepare when it's easy. See, if you prepare when it's easy, then you can thrive when it's hard. If you'll prepare when you have no disadvantages, then you can continue to move forward when the disadvantages come, when the wounds come. You can continue to move forward. Anybody see the catch that Odell Beckham Jr. made a couple weeks ago? How many of you are wondering who he is? Anybody? Good. Okay, so just, for those of you who don't know, he's a bad dude, okay? He's a grown man. And he made what some people are calling the greatest catch of all time. I don't get into that debate, okay? Because it's like MJ or LeBron. Who's the best of all time? It depends who you grew up watching play. The answer to that, by the way, is Kobe Bryant. But I don't get into that whole, who's the greatest player of all time or who was the greatest catch of all time. And so they're calling it the greatest catch of all time, though. And I want to show it to you this morning to see if you think it's the greatest catch of all time. Here he is. One hand and the flags. What? Look at that. 3 fingers. Down on the ground. Defender all around him. That's crazy. Best catch all time? Let me see your hands. We don't know. Okay. So, that was a crazy, crazy catch. It was just amazing. And for weeks after that, I heard people keep saying, did you see that lucky catch? Did you see the lucky catch that Odell Beckham Jr. made? And that's what a lot of us would think if we're honest. That lucky catch. That catch that he got lucky and made. That's what we think when we see people who have come from a difficult life thriving. That's what we think when we see people who are living a blessed life. That's what we think when we see people that are somewhere that we aspire to be. Well, they just got lucky. They just got lucky. They just came up in the right family. They just didn't face the same hardships as me. They just married the right person. They just made some better decisions. They just kind of went through some better things. They know better people. They just got lucky. But can I tell you a secret? It only looked lucky. See, you don't go through life blessed by a lucky moment. And I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful that they had cameras rolling when he was warming up a couple games before that and a couple games after that, because here's what he was doing. What's he doing? One hand. Again. One hand. He's doing the same thing. He's doing the same thing when it's easy that he had to do when it was hard. It's the same thing. See, you might have a little bit of a limp, and you might be a little bit wounded, and you may not be able to do everything the way that you used to do, but you can do the same thing. And if you will prepare when it's easy, then when you get in those moments, you'll see that your limp does not disqualify you. Your limp is what qualifies you, because you've been here before. You've done this before. I won't waste this moment. Every pain, every heartache, every struggle, every difficulty was preparing me for where God was taking me, because I've been here before. I'll play hurt. I won't quit. I won't give up. I might be wounded, but I'm still moving forward, and I'm still going to the place that God had for my life. This is not the end. This is the beginning. I will do the same thing when I'm wounded that I did when it was easy. The same thing. Would you stand with me, everyone, please?